Thanks, Teeny. Thanks, everyone. I'm glad you're here today. So I just give you a heads up. At a certain point, I'm going to ask everybody to participate in a very simple little experiment. And you'll use your chat feature. So I'm just giving you a heads up now. I'm going to ask you to use your chat feature in just a few minutes. So the topic for today is what I'm calling the paradox of communication. So let me begin with I want to start with a definition of paradox. And the English word paradox is actually a compound word. It's a Greek prefix and a Greek verb. So the prefix is para, and the prefix para in Greek means next to or alongside of. So the English word parallel. So I've kind of illustrated that with railroad tracks. So the first part of paradox, the prefix means next to or alongside of. And then dokine is a verb, that's the infinitive, and it means to appear or to seem, and what's implied is true. So dokine is to appear or to seem true. So paradox, in other words, is two true things next to or alongside of each other. So far, so good. But there is this small problem. Paradox actually means the idea that the two truths contradict each other. So the most famous, well, one of the most famous, and I'm guessing the oldest paradox, actually comes from a philosopher named Zeno. And as you can see from the dates on Zeno, about 2,500 years ago. So Zeno was kind of the first philosopher who was really interested in this idea of paradox, of two things, two true things, but when you put them side by side, they seem to contradict each other. So one of his most famous paradoxes is this one. So he says, suppose you want to travel from Athens to Arcadia, two cities in ancient Greece, a distance of 1,000 stadia. So a stadia is roughly what today we would refer to as a kilometer. So roughly 600 and some miles. So that's where he wants us to start. We're going to travel from Athens to Arcadia. And each day, he says, we're going to travel exactly half the distance. So the first day, we're going to travel 500 stadia. And then the next day, 250 and 125. And then the paradox is, he says, we will never arrive in Arcadia because we're always each day going half the distance. So that's kind of captures that ancient idea of paradox. A more contemporary, not totally contemporary, not 21st century, but a 20th century quote. So I again apologize. I never can figure out why my slides don't advance. Okay, I got to jump back so you can see that quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. So that Scott Fitzgerald is really getting at this ancient idea of paradoxes are these interesting phenomena in thought and language where these two ideas equally seem to be true, but when you put them together, they would appear to contradict one another. So when I'm talking about the paradox of communication, I've got that idea in mind. So here's the paradox. Communication is simple and communication is complex. So communication is simple in the idea, come on, advance. Communication is simple in this idea that it's a transfer of information. And that transfer of information could be from one person to another. It could be from one person, me, to all of you as a group. But that's the simple idea. That's the simple notion of communication, that it's a transfer of information. So I'm transferring this information from myself to you in terms of talking about paradox and Zeno and Scott Fitzgerald and so on and so forth. So that's the simple half of the paradox. The other half of the paradox is that communication is complex. And here, the idea is that information that is simply being transferred between the two parties is actually impossibly or is enormously complex. So here's the part where I'm going to ask for audience participation. So everybody get ready with your chat feature, and please reply to everyone, not just to me. So here's the question. How many triangles do you see? I'm going to leave that up for just a moment. Use the chat feature, and I'm going to be quiet for about 30 seconds, count the triangles, and then use the chat feature again to everybody and send your answer. Now, I'm hoping everybody's kind of following along as I am. All right. Well, good. That's perfect. That is perfect. But it does raise the question, how is this possible? Every one of you knows what a triangle is. Everyone knows how to count. So how is it that we didn't all arrive at exactly the same number? Well, this is the paradox of communication. It's because people are both the same and different at the same time. So everyone is the same in terms of we all know what a triangle is. We all know how to count, and every one of us is different in terms of how we looked at that question and at that illustration and how we counted. So I started running this little experiment literally 22 years ago, back in 2000. And here's what I can report to you, that in 20 plus years, so in more than 20 years, I have never, and you are continuing my 22-year string now, I have never had a group, actually, no matter how small or how large, ever all arrive at the same answer, never. And I'll tell you, the answers have varied widely. I think it was pretty extraordinary, but I think it just attests to the extraordinary people who are at UC Merced. It was a fairly narrow range. I saw the low end of 9 and the high end of 13. I can assure you other groups have had a lot wider range. So my hat is off to all of you at Merced. You had that nice tight range, but still everybody didn't answer the same exact way. So I remember this is a few years ago now, someone said, and this is a couple times this occurred, someone said, well, actually it's just one triangle, Gene, and there's lines drawn within it, but there's just one triangle. But the cleverest answer I've ever had over the years is someone asked me, they said, come on, advance. I apologize. It is a mystery to me why this does this. Okay, so let me jump back. They asked me, are we talking about 2 dimensions or 3? So this gets to this very, I think, important idea for not just leaders, but all of us as human beings, this idea that communication is, and I'm going to characterize it this way, is wonderfully complex, is wonderfully paradoxical. Although at times it can cause some frustration, and I'll talk about that here in just a moment. So again, the paradox is communication is simple, a simple transfer of information between two people, and it's complex. The information is impossibly complex, even in this last illustration, when the information is simple, triangles and counting. So where things really break down, I think, is when people, leaders, academics, anybody, when we try and come up with these simple rules for clear and effective communication. I did just a quick little search yesterday on this, and there are literally thousands of sites and locations where people say everybody needs to just communicate clear and effectively. Well, if it was that simple, we would have figured it out by now, and we would never miscommunicate with each other. But it's not simple because it's paradoxical. So let me give you an example. Come on. All right. And this is what I made this up so that you won't be able to Google and find this. But I call it the West Texas rule. But it's that idea: good communication is clear and direct. The people in West Texas are fond of saying around communication, just say what you mean and mean what you say. And that sounds like good advice. And I actually thought, that's what I was doing, was being clear and direct when I asked you, how many triangles do you see? But here's the reason simple rules don't work. Because language is complex, and so are people. And in fact, language and people are enormously complex. Now, language is a little less complex than human beings, but actually not a lot. So let me give you an example. If I say everyone needs to be treated fairly, I feel very confident that that's met the West Texas rule. That is clear and direct. Everyone needs to be treated fairly. Moreover, I think if I were to ask who's in favor of treating people fairly, every hand would go up. But there's a small problem, and this is the nature of language. Excuse me. Treating people fairly can mean two totally different things. I mean, literally 180 degrees out from each other. So on the one hand, treating people fairly would mean to treat everybody the same. And it would mean to treat everybody, come on, and to treat everybody uniquely. So treat everybody the same is a definition of treating people fairly. Treating everybody uniquely, an equally valid definition of treating people fairly. So now we've got a second problem. Sometimes we want to be treated just like everyone else. And sometimes we want to be treated unlike everyone else. In other words, as the unique individuals we all are. That sounds pretty clear and direct. In this instance, treat me just like everybody else. In this instance, treat me as a unique individual. But here we get to this idea, well, what does that really mean when we say we want to be treated fairly, or we want to treat others fairly, when in fact, fairly, again, can mean two totally different things. And here's where, so I'm going to say something, and it's going to implicate all human beings. So every one of us myself, chief among us, falls prey to this phenomenon. So if we're going to say what we mean and mean what we say, if we're going to be clear and direct in our communication, I would think that we would want to be, come on. So I apologize for this. For the life of me, cannot figure out why sometimes it moves forward and then sometimes it doesn't. So if we want to mean what we say, isn't that going to mean we want to be consistent? So in other words, wouldn't that mean we would always want to be treated just like everybody else? Come on. Or would we always want to be treated uniquely? But because the reality is, and there's good literature to support this, good research to support this, all of us want to appear consistent. That is a trait that is valued in all languages, in all cultures, all nations. There is a value that people put on appearing to be consistent. Doesn't mean we always are consistent, but we all value appearing, seeming to be consistent. But here's the truth, and this is a bitter pill to swallow sometimes. We want to be treated just like everyone else when it creates an advantage. If it's going to be to my advantage to be treated like everybody else, I want to be treated just like everybody else. And if it's to my advantage to be treated unlike everybody else, I want to be treated uniquely, then that's also how I want to be. So I think part of the reason that we can miscommunicate with each other is this idea that not only is communication, but the very basis of communication, language, is paradoxical. Come on. If this is frustrating for you, please know it's even more frustrating for me. So let me jump back. Okay, so language is paradoxical because language is both precise and imprecise. So if you ask me, hey, Gene, when will that report be ready? And I respond to you, in about an hour or so, what's that precise time increment or referenced by the phrase or so? Or if you ask me, hey, Gene, when will that report be ready? And I respond to you, soon, what's that exact duration of soon? I remember this was several years ago now. One of our professors at our medical school came into my office and was just had this very interesting combination of fury and what would the other one be? Just maybe great disbelief. And on the verge of tears, explained to me that their packet, their merit and promotion packet, had not been submitted on time, and that therefore they were going to be delayed till the next review cycle. And so they were bemoaning this to me and telling me how unfair it was and how indignant they were with their administrative person that they hadn't submitted it on time. So I said, yeah, you know what? I'm wondering how clearly the communication might have been. And so long story short, as we talked, and then as I corroborated by talking with their administrative assistant, there had been this kind of communication. There had been these references to time, but they had not been precise. They'd been euphemistic. And in fact, there was a whole chain of events where people had been communicating with each other using these kinds of very understandable, very common uses for referring to time. And in this particular instance, there had been almost a game of telephone where the administrative assistant had asked someone for some information that needed to be included in the packet. And when the person being asked how, when did the information need to be back, they had literally answered, "I need it soon," thinking that had been clear. Well, everybody interprets soon, of course, in their own lexicon. So this happens all the time. So why don't we just say what we mean? Well, there are two reasons. The first is, and I just alluded to it, language is both precise and imprecise. That's one of the reasons. But then the other one is because communication is occurring between human beings. And human beings are enormously complex. And one reason that you and I and everyone else on the planet is enormously complex is because of the relationships that we have with others. And here I'm going to continue to extend this idea of paradox and now talk about relationships also being paradoxical. So what I mean by that is, again, back to this idea of relationships are both precise and imprecise. And here I'm going to try and persuade you in the compass of just a very few minutes to an idea that I encountered years ago now from a faculty member at UCLA, Alan Fisk. And when I read this book, I thought, man, Fisk is really onto something. So the basic premise of the idea is that if you think about every possible type of relationship you have with another human being, it's going to fit into one of these four, what Fisk calls elementary forms of human relationships. So I'm just going to give you a very high, high altitude view of these. So one of them, Fisk refers to as authority ranking, and that's the relationship of deference to authority. So that's the relationship between someone of a higher rank or position and that of someone with a lower rank or position. That's that whole idea behind deference to authority. So that's one of the types of relationships. That could be illustrated by any kind of organization where there's rank. The military is a good example. Catholic Church, another good example. So a police department, a fire department, any kind of organ, and to some extent, the University of California, where there are these different ranks. And the idea is that people of a lower rank defer to the authority of people of upper ranks. And in exchange for protection from those in higher rank. So that's one type. So you can kind of think about a relationship you might have with someone who you either are in a position superior to or are in a subordinate position to. So the next broad category is what Fisk calls communal sharing. That's the relationship within families. So you can kind of think of that along lines of support and protection. And then equality matching, that's the relationship between friends. And there, the idea is that for a friendship to be sustainable over time, there really has to be a pretty equal give and take. All of us have probably had the experience in our lives where we're in a friendship relationship with another person, and then there comes a point in time where we feel like we're giving more to that relationship than we're getting. And almost the instant we have that thought or that thought crosses our mind, the relationship begins to fall apart, because again, equality matching between friends requires that equal give and take. And then finally, Fisk talks about then if a relationship doesn't fall into one of those three categories, the fourth is what he would call a marketplace relationship. And that's an operational, transactional kind of relationship, the grocery store clerk or the gas station transit, stuff like that. So again, back to this paradoxical idea, relationships are both precise and imprecise. So when I read Fisk's idea about these four types of relationship, I came to this idea, well, that's really going to affect how we would communicate with that other person, depending upon which of the four categories of relationships we thought it was. So back to this idea then of the four types, is we would communicate one way if we thought that the relationship with the other person was one of authority ranking, and it wouldn't matter if which position we were in, the subordinate or superior, but that would affect our communication. Another way would be if we were communicating within a family, so that kind of communal sharing, that would affect how we would communicate with each other. A third way would be the relationship between friends. And then finally, the fourth way would be that operational and transactional relationship. So, my premise here is that it's not always clear what the relationship is. And when the relationship is unclear, things can get messy, and they can get messy really fast. And when that happens, when there's that kind of uncertainty, communication can really deteriorate. And it's going to result in miscommunication. And here, I think it's because often and this is why I find Fisk's way of thinking about relationships so helpful in thinking about communication, is it can occur because of misalignment. That one person is expecting to communicate one way, and the other person is expecting to communicate a different way, and hence the misalignment. And of course, as I said, I just illustrated between individuals, but it could be between groups. It could be between an individual and a group. So let me give you an example. And let me ask it by way of a question. What's the relationship between faculty and students at the University of California, Merced campus, UC Davis campus, or any of them? Is it a relationship of authority ranking? So do students defer to the authority of the faculty? Is that the relationship? I know when I was an undergraduate, back in the Stone Age, that to some degree was the relationship. Not entirely, however, but to some degree that was true. But is that true today? Or is it more like the relationship within a family? And in fact, this Latin phrase in loco parentis is still obtains in courts of law, where faculty and administrators at a university are expected to act like the local parents, so to speak, in terms of protecting the students in, so to speak, their care, much like a parent is responsible for the care of a child. Or is the relationship between faculty and students that of equality matching? Are we just friends with each other? Not family members, there's no deference to authority, we're just friends. Or is it operational and transactional? And that would mean students pay to learn, faculty get paid to teach, and that's the relationship. It is purely transactional. Well, where things, I think, really break down in communication is when what we might think of as the rule for communication between in those four different categories isn't clear or is ambiguous to either one or both parties to the communication. And again, we're back to this idea of misalignment. this idea of what's our relationship? Because if my intuition about these 4 types of relationships will also dictate the type of communication, then if we're unclear about what our relationship is, almost by definition, our communication is also going to be unclear. And here we're living in a time, I don't think it's absolutely unusual, but I do think it is it's significant that we're living in an age where breaking rules is a not uncommon phenomenon. And once again, we're back to this idea of paradox. So breaking rules is paradoxical, because sometimes when rules get broken, it actually results in greater freedom and creativity for all concerned, or at least for many concerned. On the other hand, sometimes when we break the rules, it actually results in chaos. And this is my, again, intuition around communication when the environment's chaotic, where the rules are really unclear for what our relationships are with each other, how we're supposed to communicate with each other. When the environment is chaotic, my observation has been is that people tend to do one of 2 things. We either walk on eggshells around each other, or we kind of bulldoze our way through each other. And neither of those approaches, walking on eggshells or bulldozing, neither of those really are going to make for simple and effective or actually clear communication. So at this point in my time with you, I hope I've convinced you of this idea that communication is enormously complex. And that's why we can't have these kind of simple rules that if we just follow them, everybody will understand everybody all the time. Now, I will grant, however, and this is the paradox, that sometimes it just seems like it should be simple. Why can't we just understand each other? Well, if I've convinced you at this point, now I want to kind of pile on. And because I haven't until this point even mentioned what I think is the most powerful force. I've talked about language, I've talked about the paradoxes of language, but now I want to talk about what I think is the most powerful force in the complexity around communication. And it's not the relationships, not that ambiguity, it's not the ambiguity of language. In fact, what it is emotions. So I started using email in 1992. I was not at the university at that point. I was working for a nonprofit group called Habitat for Humanity, and we started using in our office because we had a main office and then we had regional offices distributed around the country. We started using email in 1992, so it was just this kind of professional setting in the office. And I remember at the time, everybody was talking about how wonderful email was going to be, because what email was going to do is we were just going to transfer information to each other, because everybody was sure that the real reason we misunderstood each other was because emotions crept into our communication. So we're just going to eliminate emotions. We're just going to communicate information to each other, kind of the West Texas rule, if you will. And we're going to therefore eliminate miscommunication by using email. And as all of us know, that didn't work as planned. But you know what? That begs a really important question. Why didn't it? Why didn't email work the way I was told in 1992 it was going to work? Well, I think we should blame Plato. Here's what I mean. Plato was not convinced by his mentor, Socrates, because Socrates had said to Plato, we know this because even though Socrates never wrote down anything, his most famous student, Plato, did write down their dialogues, their conversations. And Socrates had said to Plato, and Plato had written it down, that writing creates the illusion of knowledge. And here's what Socrates meant. He meant this idea that the writer knows what they mean by the words they choose, the words they write down. So the writer knows, okay, here's what I mean when I write these words. And they assume that the only way a reader is going to read those words is the way they intended them when they wrote them initially. And that's what Socrates would call the writer's illusion. So there's a two-part illusion. The second part of the illusion is that the reader knows how those words make them feel, or the thoughts that they make them, or that get generated, and then the reader is certain, well, that was the writer's intent. The writer wanted me to feel this way or to think these thoughts, and that's the reader's illusion. And the mistake that Plato made, it was this idea that writing could be so precise. Remember, though, language is paradoxical. It's precise and imprecise. But Plato thought, yes, but if we're really deliberate, if we're very careful in how we write, the reader is never going to misunderstand us. Is never going to have an emotion or a thought that we did not intend as the writer. But what Socrates understood is that all language, written or spoken, is imprecise. And that's why we refer to Socratic dialogue and not Socratic texting. Because Socrates understood that all languages pull in two opposite directions. So all languages pull us together. And that's the purpose of things like slang and idiom and acronyms. What those do, what slang, idiom, and acronyms do, is they pull us together. They help us recognize, we're insiders. We know what those acronyms mean. We know what that slang means. We're insiders. And of course, what's also true is that languages push us apart. And that's the purpose of sarcasm and racial slurs and other things like that in that category, because those are intended to signal to the other person, oh, no, you are not an insider. You think you know what's going on? Let us disabuse you. Let me disabuse you of that idea. You are not an insider, because we're the only ones who get it. And this is, we can hear this idea in a phrasing we often use with humor. It's an inside joke. He didn't get it. So the idea is that humor is going to cut us in and cut us out. So how do we get out of this rabbit hole? Well, I've got 4 ideas that I want to share with you, and then I want to hear your thoughts. So the first is, we got to slow down long enough to think. So think's an acronym. And here's the first part of it. So the T in think is, do I recognize that my truth may not be the other person's truth or group's truth? And can I accept the idea that neither of us might have the absolute or whole truth? The H in think is what I'm going to say, write, or do helpful? Or am I just trying to hurt or harm the other person with my words? I think that a lot of times we can fool ourselves here with the H, is we think we're being helpful by calling out someone, by shaming them. Maybe, but I also wonder if what we're really trying to do, but we're fooling ourselves into thinking that we're being helpful, what we're really trying to do is a little bit of harm, a little bit of hurt, a little bit of sting. So the I in think is what I'm going to say, right, or do insightful or insightful? Are my words going to create more light or more heat? The N in think, the N in think is, do I know what everyone else needs in order to feel good about this issue or decision or situation? Or am I just focused exclusively on my needs or my group's needs alone? And then finally, the K in think is, is what I'm going to say, right, or do knowing, meaning would others recognize my words or actions as wise and knowing? So the second thing I'm going to suggest is this idea that everyone sees and interprets things from their own perspective. Absolutely everyone. I'm going to let you look at that cartoon for just a moment. So when I asked how many triangles do you see, that's really this perspective idea. And what we want to keep in mind is that when people disagree about what they think are facts, when in fact are perspectives, it can unleash some very powerful emotions. And I kind of illustrate with the little cartoon, do you know what the facts are? When really what we're talking about are perspectives. And are you doubting or disagreeing with these facts? Again, perspectives. And the only way we're going to enlarge our perspective, enlarge our purchase on the truth, is to as I say in this bottom little illustration, is move to the other side and look and see how things look from another perspective. So I use this idea with the compass. If we really want to get a better grasp on things, we've got to move from point A to point B. In other words, we can't be the fixed point in the compass. We got to be the moving point in the compass. So 3 is before hitting the send button. So now I'm back to 1992 and email. Before hitting the send button, I'd like you to stop and ask yourself just 3 simple questions. Is your heart rate elevated? Is your breathing shallow and fast? What is your mood or emotional state? And if it's not that one, don't hit the send button. Or if you're going to hit the send button, put your own inbox on the to line. Finally, the 4th little piece of advice I would offer is this is from the 4th century, from Saint Athanasius, Bishop in Alexandria, Egypt. Be kind to all, for everyone you meet is fighting a great battle. And who am I to judge another's battle as lesser than mine? All right, so I'm going to stop at that point. We've got about 15 minutes, and I'm going to give you the last word on these matters. So thoughts or questions, you can chat, you can unmute. Any's fine. And if you use the little emoji hand raised, that would be wonderful too. All right, Teeny, please.
Okay, well, that was a great lecture as always. Thank you so much. And communication is so important to the work we do, the relationships we build and maintain, and everything, right? It's everywhere. Here's my question, Jean. I've always been considered a very literal person. Sometimes when people are telling a joke, or especially if there's sarcasm involved, right, or kind of a joke to degrade another person, even if it's well intended and stuff like that. I don't know. It's like sometimes I'll have a hard time understanding the thrust of what the person is really saying. And it's funny because I study metaphor in my profession as a professor and an academic, but I have a hard time understanding non-literal language sometimes. Yeah. So do you have any thoughts on jokes, humor, non-literal language in the work setting and the communication that we all do, either on the computer or in person? Thanks.
I have a hard and fast rule when it comes to humor. And I want to be very serious about talking about humor at this point. There is one person and only one person on the planet you should ever make fun of, and that's yourself. Period. No exceptions. No exceptions. Because there is no such thing as making fun of someone in jest. It always has that little bit of an edge. No matter how close you are as friends and stuff like that, I just feel so strongly about this. And here's what's so interesting about self-effacing humor, making fun of yourself, making fun of being an old, bald guy, is, and the literature on this is pretty consistent. And so I'm always pleased when I read studies, that subsequent studies find the same conclusions. And the research on this is pretty consistent and pretty clear, is that people who make fun of themselves in a lighthearted way, I'm going to continue this in just a moment, but in a lighthearted way, are pretty, as we say, comfortable in their own skin. They're pretty self-secure, because only people who are pretty secure in themselves can make fun of themselves. So the whole reason I can make fun of being an old, bald, white guy is because I'm pretty comfortable after 70 years on the planet being an old, bald, white guy. But that doesn't give me even permission to make fun of other old, bald, white guys, because they might not be as comfortable in being old or white or bald. And so one and only one person on the planet you can make fun of: yourself. But there that's also gotta be bounded by the idea that you wanna avoid what I think are two, pathology is way too strong of a word, but maladaptive behaviors is maybe better. And the first is playing for sympathy would be what I would call it. And self-pitying, and oh, woe is me. I'm just so unhappy. I'm so miserable. My life is so distraught. And what I'm trying to do is elicit sympathy. I'm trying to elicit people to, oh no, Gene, you're a nice guy. Yeah, you do some stupid things at times, but hey, everybody does. I don't find that particularly healthy emotionally. And the other is, and that one is not as self-destructive as this other one. And that is, and here I'm going to distinguish between two very powerful emotions, but they are fundamentally different. The first is regret, and the second is shame. So regret is the idea that I made a mistake, and I'm going to learn from that mistake, and I'm going to correct it going forward. So I feel badly about the mistake, but I don't internalize that. And shame is an internalization of that feeling badly about something. And it's not, I made a mistake, but I am a mistake. And therefore I can't escape from my mistakenness. Of course, I'm going to make bad decisions because I'm broken, or I'm whatever characterization that results from shame on that. And the difference is, and this is really important, when we experience the emotion of regret, it energizes us. Boy, I am not going to make that mistake again. It really gives us focus and determination. Shame, on the other hand, is enervating. It drains us. When we feel ashamed, it disempowers us, and feeling regret empowers us. So my hard and fast rules: only one person on the planet to make fun of: yourself. And I think some good, lighthearted, self-effacing humor is important. Every day I try and remind myself how foolish I am, because it's kind of evens me out. So other thoughts, questions, observations? Whoa, sorry. So please, Jay.
Hi there, thank you. This has been a very enlightening conversation. So I, once had a therapist tell me that you can't bottle up all those emotions.
Right.
So, and I can understand how we don't want to try to do it by email.
Right.
But how do we manage that? Because it's kind of important for people to know that something is going on that raises an emotional response.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That is a great question. So I taught a course at the medical school called Difficult Conversations. And at the very beginning of that course, I would say, I want to distinguish between a difficult conversation and an unpleasant conversation, because we could confuse the two easily. An unpleasant conversation is one we don't relish, we don't look forward to, but we're going to have nonetheless. And this is the critical part, and there's nothing else I need to learn from that other person that would change my mind. A difficult conversation, on the other hand, is one where I know there's things I need to learn from their perspective, so let me illustrate what I mean, because that's not particularly clear. So I was the department chair for a few years, and people in the department, faculty all had offices, but staff people worked in cubicles, and I remember I would often, at the end of the day or first thing in the morning, if I was there and the other person wasn't, I'd leave them a little sticky note or something like that. And I remember I left a sticky note. One of my colleagues, put it on the computer screen, and then I had habitually always turned to my left when I left the cubicle entrance. And for whatever reason, Jay, and I to this day, I still do not know why, I turned to the right and I saw a poster on his wall, and it was not of a nude woman, but a woman very scantily dressed. So I made a point of the next morning when he came into the office, I went to his cubicle, and just above a whisper, I didn't want to tell it, I didn't want to broadly communicate, but I said to him, you need to take that poster down right now, or I'm going to take it down because it's inappropriate in this office, and I'm not going to tolerate it. And he gave me this, First Amendment, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't think I'm being clear. You can take it down off the wall right now, and you can take it home, and you can put it anywhere in your home you want. If I take it down, I'm going to shred it, and you won't have it. And we went back and forth a time or two, but he was real clear that I was real clear. That was an unpleasant conversation, but there was nothing that he was going to tell me about the First Amendment or his rights that was going to change my mind. A difficult conversation, on the other hand, would be where I know I don't know everything about the other person's point of view, and I know I need to. So I'm another illustration of that idea is I had a policy in the department. It was kind of a unwritten, because the college did not have a written policy, but I had a unwritten policy that people who had childcare obligations, I wanted them to know that if they got one of those calls and their child was sick or something, they had not only my permission, but my encouragement to leave. Give their direct supervisor a heads up, but there was no questions asked. They didn't have to ask for it. It was just, that was so I knew I'd heard that one of the faculty, in this case, it happened to be I'm sorry, not a faculty member. It was a pretty senior administrative person, was really unhappy with me because thought it was totally unfair, but I didn't know why. So I decided I'm not looking forward to this conversation, but I really owe it to them because I've heard that they're unhappy. So I went and I said, I have heard that you're unhappy with my policy, and he said, well, I don't have kids, and I should be able to go play golf at 3 o'clock in the afternoon just because I want to go play golf. And I said to him, you know what, I do appreciate that perspective. And I also appreciate how it could look like what I'm doing is unfair to you. And all I'm telling you is I'm not going to give you permission to go play golf. But if anything happens in your life where you need to maybe take care of a parent or a loved one or anything like that, no questions asked. You go. You don't need anybody's permission. You go. So that was a difficult conversation because I had to figure out what was it particularly that was bothering him about it. But it also allowed me to hear from him things that I didn't know, but that gave me then the opportunity to explain to him things that he didn't know, that I wasn't just interested in taking care of the young parents in the department. Does that make a little more sense? And then in terms of expressing emotions, I think what we want to do is express them in a way where we are getting information from the other person in terms of facial expression, body language, stuff like that. So that, and let's say you were upset with me. So Jay, you could send me an email and say, Gene, we need to talk. And I might write back, what's the problem? And say, no, we need to talk. And then that's where we would have the conversation where you would tell me, I'm really upset that you did this or you didn't do that or whatever. But I think when it comes to email, I just have had too many personal experiences. I've had too many hours spent with people who really regretted that they hit the send button. And sometimes with very serious consequences, not just trivial. So does that answer your really good question a little bit? All right, thanks, Jay. So let me go to the chat. Yeah, so so Kathy, you raise a great question. And the way I like to think about it is, thanks, Christian, for sending out word. The way I like to think about how do we communicate up, because that's really what we're talking about, is I always like to remind myself, no matter who I'm talking about, a peer, someone who's in a superior position, my dean, my boss, my teenie, or someone who would be in a subordinate position to me, I always want to communicate in such a way that the other person doesn't lose face from what I tell them. And Jay, this really kind of goes to your question as well. So one of the things I practiced and taught in my courses is to always book in a hard message with these parameters. So once again, let's say you've got heartache with me, Jay, and let's say for whatever reason, you're the faculty member, I'm the chair, and it would say, Gene, I know it is not your intention to make me feel, not heard or not recognized. And when I'm talking and you're just kind of doodling or something, or you're looking off, it makes me feel like you're not listening to me. And again, I know that's not your intention. So when we bookend something hard, we're reminding people of their better angels, to use Lincoln's phrase. And there's no downside to reminding people that they're good and kind, and even good and kind people say things and do things at times that aren't good and kind. But we want to remind people when we're giving them those hard messages, I know you're a good person. I know that was not your intent. Now, does that mean that there's never bad intent? Of course not. There is bad intent, but I think it happens a lot less frequently than we might otherwise think. And ladies and gentlemen, we have now run over the hour. So thank you for spending this hour with me. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next month. In the meantime, if you have additional thoughts, about anything I said today or any of these talks, don't hesitate to send me an email, even though I've talked about email. So it's C Crumley, because even though I go by Gene, my legal name is Charles Eugene Crumley. So C Crumley at ucmerced.edu, or if you want to send it to my Davis address, CE Crumley, Charles Eugene Crumley at ucdavis.edu. And thank you for your time and attention today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jean. Thanks, everybody. What a great lunch hour. Take care. Bye now.
Thanks.